Welcome, everyone, to the Repurpose Your Purpose podcast. And I'm your host, Aurora Meneghello. I am super excited today to have here Evan Troxel. Evan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? I mean, I feel like we've known each other for so long, and this is like we're kind of closing a loop here on some levels. Not like a cosmic loop, right? But just careers and just threads through our professional lives. It's pretty cool.
I know that's kind of amazing, actually. And I think No Veg, where that's the company through which I met you, is like probably the first time I hosted something like this online myself. I hadn't even thought about it, and I'm like, so you're right. There's a loop right there.
There you go. Yep.
So, for everybody who doesn't know you, will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm an architect licensed in the state of California, your state as well. I recently moved out of California into Oregon. So I'm a expatriate, I guess, of California and the LA area. But I don't miss it at all. I'm in a happy place here in Southern Oregon. And because I'm close to nature and trails and no, there's just no noise pollution here. I don't know. It's a bunch of fun. It's a bunch of great things. So if you ever want to come visit, I'll definitely host you. But I've been an architect since I think I turned. It's been about almost 10 years that I became an architect. So later in my career than I think what a lot of people do, but not everybody. The road to the path to architecture and the license of is a long path for many people. And so I practiced architecture, and I mentioned that a little bit in the past tense because I'm mostly a podcaster now, and my podcasting I've been doing going on year 12 for the Archispeak podcast. So that one's been running for a while, and we're about to, well, we just released episode 329. So we've been doing this for a long time. I've started another podcast, which is my last name without the vowels. So it's TRXL. That's the Troxel podcast. And that one is really about the coevolution of architecture and technology, which is really my specialty in architecture, is the technology side of things. Even though, as an architect, you do a lot of things, and my focus was design, but I've always had more of a technical, maybe not technical is the right word, but just a bent towards technology and using tools to accomplish our jobs. Um, Whereas the Archispeak podcast is just general by architects for architects, water cooler talk, what it's like to be an architect. And in that one, our audience is really anywhere from students to post-retiree. We have lots and lots of gradient in age group of who listens to that show. Troxel podcast is a lot more specific. It's people who are passionate about technology in AEC. So AEC is architecture, engineering, and construction. And then I've recently started a third podcast called the Confluence Podcast with a friend of mine in Kentucky who runs a technology company. And that one, we describe it as the director's commentary track to AEC industry software developers. So it's really behind the scenes look at developing software for AEC. So how do you do what you do? What decisions do you make along the way? Because this is kind of a up and coming, I hate to say it that way, but architecture is late to a lot of things. Um, Up and coming topically because there's a lot of software developers who have kind of defined that niche for themselves in architecture and AEC, the industry at large. So anyway, I have my plate very full with podcasting. And so my past tense, I'm still a licensed architect, but I have not done a project in a few years now. And so I guess that title comes second to me.
Well, what I love about what you do is that you're also really helping people learn
Hmm.
and discover things, in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
Um,
Putting ourselves out there is something that not very many architects do beyond the portfolio on their website, right? And so my goal is to make, I am so passionate about our profession, and so I talk about it. And we've had so many students on Archispeak write in and say, "Thank you for telling us what it's actually like to be an architect because our professors don't know. Like they're academics. That's what they do. They teach architectural design studios, structures, architectural history, whatever it may be that their specialty is, but they don't work in the practice typically. They may do a project here or there, but maybe just for their own practice, and they don't work at a big firm, but they're preparing students to go work in large firms and medium-sized firms and small firms or to start their own firms. And so I just feel like there's a big gap there that we saw. And I'm not saying that we masterminded this out and planned this all out, but it just kind of happened that we turned out to be educating the future generations in a very small way about what to expect when they got into the profession, to their career of being an architect. So yeah, I mean, that's a big purpose of ours now is to foster the path forward to become an architect.
So I know you could, well, you've been speaking about this for 12 years, so there's a ton of stuff you could say, but I am curious because I can really imagine that from seeing a beautiful building and imagining, okay, I'm gonna design that, and even having to, going through school and working on the theory and the design and all that, what are a couple of things that are surprising to people coming out of school and actually going into the business of architecture?
Oh, this is an easy softball question. Thank you. So in architecture school, students are trained to go it alone, to be the Lone Ranger, the hero of every project, of every story, and they have to do everything. So you design the project, you build the model, you draw the plans, you present it to a jury of critics at the end or, along the way, and then at the end of the project. And the group projects are always the worst, right? They're the worst projects. We've all experienced those projects in school where you were the group project coordinator because you're the responsible one and people weren't pulling their weight and you were always trying to follow up with people and get them to do something. And how come they're not doing as much as I am? Or you're the other end of that. You're the one who's like, they've got it. I'll just let them deal with all the stress. Every project in architecture is a team project, every single one of them. And so there's this misalignment between what you're learning in school to be the one, because worst case scenario is you're going to run your own practice and you are going to have to do a lot. But most people don't go that route. Most people are in a firm of some number of people where there's a distribution of responsibilities. We work with consultants for all kinds of things. And so when you're doing that, you're part of a team and you do have to learn how then to delegate or to give away some responsibility and it you might not get back what you like, but that's the reality of it. On top of that, you're working with real clients. A lot of times, lots of clients. I worked in public projects, which would be schools, healthcare, civic work. The number of clients that we had was, 10, 20, 30, 40 people at a meeting who all have an opinion that you then, as the architect, have to kind of, you know, synthesize that into reality at some point. All of those ideas, and you have to make everybody somewhat happy because you're not going to make everybody happy all the time, right? So I think that's a huge shock when people get out of school, they go to work for a firm and they realize that they're a very small piece of a much larger team when you were trained that you were going to be the one, right? And the truth of the matter is that that's rarely, rarely, rarely the case. Um, there's a lot of other lessons out there that I think, how long, excuse me, how long it takes to do a project. I mean, in school, every project is a piece of a semester, or maybe the whole semester, maybe it's a couple semesters, but it's not 5 years, right? Projects take that long in architecture. How long does it take for somebody to get to the next level in their career, the next position, their next station? That can take 3 years for me to move from one role to the next level in that role. So I think all of that's a little bit shocking and opaque because I think a lot of times also people will say, "Hey, what does it take for me to get to the next level?" And oftentimes the answer is just keep doing what you're doing, which is like zero information, right? It totally keeps candidates and people who are working their way up in the dark, kind of intentionally because most people don't have time to think about other people in architecture either because deadlines are looming constantly. We're constantly working toward a project deadline. Like every week, there's a new project deadline that people are really scrambling for, and it doesn't leave a lot of time for mentoring and developing other people in with intention to take the place of the role ahead of you. So I think there's a lot of issues there that we're working through collectively as an industry. But I think those are all kind of shocking for people who are moving into the industry in the early stages.
I have so many follow-up questions and thoughts.
All right.
Let me gather my thinking. Which one is the one that really comes first for me is that, so, I help people change careers and do what they
Hmm.
love and so forth. And a very common thing I hear from especially younger people is that they feel bad when they get into a job and they realize this is not a good fit. And from my perspective, it's like, no, that's actually very common that especially at the beginning of your career, nobody explained to you like what that was gonna really be like. And also you probably didn't even know about yourself as much, right? So,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. So some of the things you're saying, like for example, how collaborative you are and how much you like to work for yourself, I think it can be very deceptive in some careers, how much you can work solo versus no, the reality is like you constantly gonna have to deal with people.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right on there. And I have kids who are my youngest just turned 18. So I've seen this happen where they will they'll watch YouTube or they'll watch Instagram Reels or TikToks or whatever, and they see and this is no different for architects who grew up even when I did when they saw Starchitects, right? Like the top level and like I want to be that. And the reality is, like, that is a very, very minuscule percentage of the overall profession. So my kids do it with YouTubers, right? It wasn't a job when I was growing up. YouTuber was not a career path. It is totally now. Influencers, athletes who are earning $70 million a season, or you see these ridiculous things, and it's like, yeah, I want to be that. I want to be, and so what are the chances that that was the thing that that person was going to be so good at? Well, it's all amplified now because of personal media, right? And followers and gaming the system and algorithms and all these crazy metrics and stuff that people are playing with. Um, where those are that becomes the signal that these younger generations look at. And like I said, our generation wasn't any different, but it was probably a smaller number of examples than there are that are just so apparent today. It's everywhere, right? And it's like everybody's a star. And it's like, no, like that's very small percentage are. And so when you're trying to navigate that and maybe where you want to get, or maybe you think to your point, where you want to get, I mean, the chances are very low that you're going to hit your stride on the exact path that you're already on to get there. You have, I've talked about this before. Here, I'll draw it, right? This is what everybody thinks the journey looks like, right? Oh, can you see that? It's just a
Yeah, I
line,
can see
right?
it actually. It's great. Yeah, but you why not
And
say maybe narrate it for those just listening? Yeah.
yeah, so I just drew a straight line. It's like beginning and end, and we connect the dot in between those with a single line. But the journey is like this, sometimes it goes back and it goes forward, and you never know where that journey is going to lead you. And there's different decisions you make every single day. You have different advocates in your path that can either help you, as an advocate, or there could be roadblocks. There could be toxic individuals that there could be people who are trying to dissuade you because they had a bad experience, and therefore you are also going to have the same experience they did, right? Which is their expectation, oddly. So I think all of those things are very real, and that or everybody's faking it until they make it at some level. We're all going through that together, and like I said, the chances of you finding the right thing at every step of the journey is a very low percentage game.
So let me say one thing about it. I find it really interesting you brought up the YouTuber and personal branding thing because on one hand, there's a lot more of an opportunity of expressing yourself, obviously, and working for yourself and so forth. But on another hand, like on the other hand, I feel like it almost fuels some mindsets that are exactly the opposite of what you need to
Mm,
have a good
mm,
career, which is, how can I be of service? How can I do my job in a way that's helpful and it's not all about me, right? Like these are very important things.
yeah,
And I'm saying also because I had to learn the hard way too, right? That sometimes I really got the message of like, oh no, it's all about, I have to really look good. I have to really, yeah, that is not that helpful in a whole lot of
right.
environments, right? But it gets
Yep.
very tricky because on one hand, you don't want to go too much in that direction. On the other hand, like you said, the people that then appear all the time, and there is this winner take all sometimes mentality, right?
Yep.
That so I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that. I talk a lot about that with a friend of mine actually.
Yeah, I do. I think the thing that's been resonating with me mostly around that topic recently is about s- yeah, so you're right. People are always concerned about their image, their perception. I would say that you could truncate all of that potential pain and how much work you have to do to make yourself look good by obsessing over quality in the work that you're doing. I
Mm,
think that will paint you in a light that is unachievable by most people because most people gloss over that and it's very surface. It's about how it looks, and I'm talking about something much deeper than that, right? Which is if you do the work to the highest level and you really obsess over quality, the other things will happen naturally. And I think that is the thing that's really been resonating with me most. And I think that's very difficult in today's world because of the number of distractions, the people trying to constantly get your attention. It could be your email, it could be all the notifications on your phone, it could be Slack, it could be Discord, all these notification and messaging systems that are constantly vying for your attention really take away your ability to obsess over quality because if you don't have the time and like the mental, I don't know, barriers to stay focused on something important, and important could be any number of things, right? It could be important to you. It could be important to your boss. It could be important to the organization that you work for. It could be the project team. It could just be hitting the deadline. But if you are somebody who constantly comes through and does high quality, high caliber work, I think those other things will happen much more naturally. And you won't have to worry about how you look because the work speaks on your behalf at that point.
I think that's a great point and a great reminder. And also, it strikes me that you need to have more of a long-term view or at least medium-term view
Mhm.
because it will take a little bit for that to really show results, and you have to have faith that that's the way it works.
Yeah, vanity metrics, you hear that term quite often. How many likes, how many followers? It's like it's kind of like who cares? Because let's say your YouTube channel has 100,000 followers. Like I have several YouTube channels. None of them have even 1,000 followers, but the number isn't what's important. It's the quality of the people who are following you. And so if you're not doing something that people are gravitating towards and subscribing to you, and who cares? I mean, if you're really speaking to those smaller number of people and you're a trusted voice that they keep coming back to and getting great information from in this media kind of example, my podcast, the audio side, actually has a lot more listeners than I do on the YouTube side. But again, it's not about the total number, the vanity side of it. It's about the quality side of it. And what are they getting out of it? Are you both going somewhere together, right? And to me, that has a lot more depth and meaning to it than what an advertiser might ask if you wanted to have your podcast sponsored. All they kind of care about is what? How many listeners do you have? How many subscribers do you have? And it's like, well, not only do I not have the most subscribers, but the bonus side for you is they're actually going to click on the link because I recommended it, right? And so there's a shift there that not enough people I think are really paying attention to.
And congratulations, you're the first one where my cat showed up. We really were there. Glory, but if you've been hearing the meowing, that's my cat in the background that wants attention, everybody. Okay, I have two questions for you. They're big questions. You get to choose which one you want
Okay.
first, the business question or the technology question.
Dealer's choice. Let's go in the order that you said. Let's go with business.
Business. Okay, so a lot of what you're talking about, it strikes me as important for everybody, but three times as important when you work for yourself.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
because you have to really have the discipline. And I love working for myself, but it took me a long time. And it's a constant also learning and revisiting what I need to stay focused, what I need to stay at least confident enough not to fall into, paralyzing insecurity.
Yeah.
What I need to even think if I have to pivot or make changes, right? Like build support. I mean, there's so many things. So I'm curious, if you can talk a little bit about your experience of what makes a business owner or a solopreneur competitive and successful. And, as an architect or also not as an architect, right? Like,
Hmm.
so your experience on that.
Yeah. So come at that from because I don't run my own practice as an architect, but I do run my own media company, which is what my podcasts come out of. And so I am a solopreneur, and that is only as of like the last 7 months or so. So before that, I worked in a small startup, and before that, I worked in a large architecture firm. And so I've seen some very different landscapes as I've gone through that journey. In the large firm, you can count on a lot of people to do a lot of very specific things. In the startup, you do a lot more of a lot more things, right? Because you just don't have the staff to delegate to. You don't have, I mean, we rely on technology a lot more. And now that I'm doing it by myself, I rely on technology even more because I have to be 10 different people, right, to accomplish the same thing. So I think that maybe you can just restate your question now that I've said that. Remind me
No,
what
I
you were
think
actually
actually,
asking there.
yeah, no, I think it's actually that's exactly what I'm asking because it's so interesting that not only you've been talking to a lot of people through
Yeah.
your Archispeak, but also you've had experience in different
Hmm.
things, right? And sometimes I think this is another area where people don't realize you get to be and use the skills quite differently and sometimes different skills depending on whether you're working for yourself on a small
Yeah.
team or as an employee. And so I'm curious, some of the things that you've observed or you heard about or that you experienced yourself that really help solopreneurs or business owners be successful.
Yeah, I remember now where I was going with that, which is really the media side of things. So I've always considered myself an architect first and then doing this other stuff on the side. Like this started as a side hustle. Now it's my main thing. Well, how did that happen? Right? And so it's by doing it. And one of my theses is that everybody is a media company, whether you know it or not. And I think one of the things that, well, I guess what I mean by that is we have the tools nowadays to have a presence in a much larger, as much as you're willing to claim, landscape, right? So I could be an architect in my town or my region, but I can be a global podcaster, right? And you could, of course, be a regional podcaster versus a global podcaster, and you kind of decide. And you can be intentional about that, or you can not be intentional about that. Like we were not intentional about that. We started this Archispeak podcast. We didn't know what we were doing. We just started doing it, and then we grew our audience to over 80,000 people, right? And so, how did that happen? I can't really tell you other than like you just keep showing up. You just keep practicing. And so whether you, same thing goes for social media. I know you've done a lot of coaching around the use of social media. I even talked to you like probably 10 years ago about like buying Facebook ads, right? Like for my book. I mean,
Right.
it wasn't 10 years ago. It was 2017, 2018, something like that. But it was things like that where it's like you can get your what you do, your opinion, your values, your thoughts in front of a lot of other people now very easily. And you can, like we're doing it right now, right? We're sitting in front of Zoom recording a podcast. You can do it from your phone, you can do it from your computer, you can do it in a dedicated studio like mine, or you can literally do it just sitting on your phone somewhere. And you can start putting this stuff out there. Doesn't mean anybody's going to listen, but I do believe it's important to show up and continue to do that because you will get to a point where people will be listening to you and you will have been doing this where your competition has not been doing it. And then all of a sudden, when it's time to make a decision about who I align with as a customer, potential customer of yours, if I know what your values are, if I know how you think, if we're resonating together, we're probably going to be a good match, right? Versus I don't know anything about the person I want to hire. That's a much different situation, right? And so people like to do their research. They like to look things up on Google. They like to ask ChatGPT, who should I be looking at? Who should I be listening to? What kind of questions should I ask? There's so many things that we can now do research on to find out more about people that if you don't have anything out there, that starts to become a red flag, right? So
Mm.
I think as a small business, it's something you really want to be thinking about very seriously. Is just how are you going to have a presence somewhere and just pick one place. Like it doesn't have to be everywhere. If it's YouTube or Instagram or Facebook, like where's your audience is probably the best place to do it, right? But um, but I feel like that's a huge it's just a really big deal nowadays that because if you don't do it, something's going on there. Something might be wrong.
Well, and I think when I first met you, you had just started your podcast probably.
Hmm.
Uh, and so that really grew out of the quality. It was showing up exactly with the intention you were mentioning, which is doing quality work.
Well, and I think you were at Noveg, I believe, when
Yeah.
we first met.
Yeah.
You were doing marketing there, and I had put some tutorials online about how to use 3D software, right? And Noveg sold lots of 3D software titles, and it was because I just wanted to. It was two things. I wanted to teach people. I was already an instructor. I was a professor at a university, and I would put stuff up that I would do again as a side hustle, just on this. I wasn't hustling. I was just making these videos to help my students and putting them on Vimeo back in the day, like when it was like the choice between Vimeo or YouTube. And I went with Vimeo because there were no ads on Vimeo, right? YouTube was ads. I didn't want those ads like crapping up my videos. And look who won that, right? It was YouTube. But I was putting those videos out and you saw those videos. Like who else was putting
Mm.
3D training videos out? Like how many did I have out? Probably not very many, but you saw them and that led to an opportunity for me and for you to start something, for Noveg and do some webinars and things like that, which then led to the next thing, which then led to the next thing. And so um, here we are. We're reconnecting after many, many years of where that all started, all because I put a video online, right? And put myself out there.
That's amazing. I didn't remember. I couldn't remember exactly how,
Yeah.
that's so cool. That's perfect.
Right.
Right. Okay, well, also, this is a perfect segue to the other question I wanted to ask, which is, okay, let me give a little bit of a premise here because a lot of the time when we talk about changing careers, we imagine, and I talk to people that think, okay, I don't like to do what I'm doing now, or maybe I never liked it, and so what can I do next, right? That. But sometimes, actually, I would say now it's like most of the time, your
Hmm.
career will change on you because
Hmm.
with technology and other forces, sometimes, the career you chose might not be the same thing day to day, 10, 15 years later. And we live a long time, we're lucky. And
Yeah.
so one thing that I like about everything you've been doing is that you didn't fight the technological change that came to architecture and keeps coming, but you sort of embraced it, right? And so I really want to hear more about that mindset, or what made it possible for you, and how you have seen this change in technology and architecture.
Well, like I said, when I kind of introduced myself, this is just a passion of mine. And so I think on some level, it's just the way that I'm wired
Mm,
because I see it plenty. There's lots of architects who are fighting the change
mm,
all the time. It doesn't matter what it is. Like there's many architects still drawing by hand. There's many architects still using 2D CAD. There's many architects using BIM. There's now the existential crisis is AI in everything, right? And architecture is definitely in the same boat where it's disrupting things. And for me, I mean, the trope that I keep hearing now is that AI is not going to take your job. Somebody who uses AI effectively is going to take your job. And so it's a way to give people hope that like, oh, if you want to figure out what's how to do what you do but better in a better position, like you need to learn the tools that everybody's learning because if it's you who doesn't use them versus somebody who does use them, the choice is probably going to be to pick the person who does use them. And it's funny because I've never really thought of it that way for me. Like I said, it's just kind of my natural disposition to I'm interested in change. I'm interested in technology. There are other people who are completely like, allergic to change and allergic to technology, right? So, and I'm not here to say one way is right and another way is wrong, but technology changes everything. Technology, another word for it is tools, right? Humans use tools. Tools could be an actual physical tool that you use in your hand, or it could be a piece of software, right? That tool gives you leverage to do something that you cannot do without it. That's what a tool is, right? So language is a tool, right? Listening is a tool. These are all tools that can make you better at what you do. But technology, to me, kind of gives you superhuman
mm,
powers because I can do things on my little tiny laptop that 5 years ago, people couldn't do on a giant desktop computer. And if people 5 years ago didn't start looking at how to use mobile technology to accomplish their job, like when everybody expects them to be able to do that and they say, you know what, I never got into that, it's like, oh, you're automatically at a disadvantage. So I like testing things out and finding out what works, what doesn't right now. That could change tomorrow, right? You might try something today and write it off and then tomorrow it's way better. And because you wrote it off, you won't even look at it. And now you're at the disadvantage. So constantly just keeping your fingers on the pulse of what's going on, who's using it, how are they using it, what advantages are they getting. To me, like that's a good place to be because I know more about what's actually going on and how those tools are being leveraged. For example, like I remember this YouTuber talking about the iPad to for his whole music studio. It was all on one iPad. So he was a musician and he could how many musicians out there are using an iPad to completely produce music or soundtracks or whatever they're doing? Like not very many, right? He says, but when everybody like when everybody figures out that this is a viable tool, I will be light years ahead of them,
mm,
right? And so that really resonated with me when it came to BIM, which is building information modeling, which is it's a more data rich and intensive way of drawing architecture because the drawings that we derive from that model are automatically coordinated.
mm.
That's a big deal for architects because I don't have to spend the time manually coordinating a bunch of separate drawings anymore, right? So learning that early gave me an advantage because I was then the one who was spitting out automatically coordinated drawings, which was saving me and my client a bunch of time and money, right? So not all technology leads to the perfect place, but and it's all like I drew that diagram earlier. It's a wiggly road to get there. But I feel like technology really does kind of enable us to do way more than we can without it. And so it's always been something I think that's beneficial for everybody, but everybody obviously has the choice to make for themselves.
Yeah. Um, you mentioned threads actually at the beginning, and I'm curious, what is the thread that has always guided you in everything you've done?
Doing something really well. I think it I think to me, uh, So I mentioned quality earlier, and I think the reason that resonates with me is because it is part of who I am. Um, I'm reminded that I'm not the most high quality all the time by my wife, right? Like she she is a perfectionist, right? And she shows me things that I can aspire to do better. And I think it's important to have that. But I've always been really proud of my work, and I'm not concerned about the vanity metrics. I'm way more interested in building something that matters and in something that is useful and valuable to others. One of my taglines that I've used like on my websites throughout the years is I share everything I know. And for me to, I get a lot of gratification by doing that. I get a lot of validation by doing that because there are not enough people in my line of work who do that publicly. They may do it privately. They may do it, in a mentorship, mentee kind of a situation, but doing it one to many is what the internet has afforded us the ability to do in much bigger numbers, I think, than we ever could have imagined. And so for me to do something that is quality for many is really an important thread in my life. And so that led to creating a podcast and then two podcasts and then three podcasts. And it applied to my architecture projects. It applied to the book that I wrote about getting your license in architecture. It was what I did in school when I was a professor and teaching students in the architecture programs, right? So that to me has always kind of been the thing. It's just I'm very interested in doing a lot of things. I'm very interested in living five lives at the same time because I only get one chance, right? So I want to do it all and I want to do it all really well. And so I may not dive as deeply as I could in each one of those things, but the thread that does tie them all together is I want them all to be really nice. I want not perfect, right? But really nice and quality. So I guess that's my answer to that question. I probably could have gone
No,
five
that's
different ways with that,
awesome.
but that was it.
Well, I think it really resonates with me seeing your work
Mm,
throughout the years.
mm,
You know,
yeah.
it really captures it.
Well, thank you.
Um, all right, I have to ask you if there's something else you would like me to ask you about before my last two questions. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about you really like to talk about?
Well, I'm curious about your goals for this podcast. I mean, I've been doing podcasting for a while, so and I know why I do what I do, maybe a little bit, but I'm curious about yours, and maybe that would lead to something.
Okay. Well, I feel like when it comes to career and business, a lot of the time we talk about money, marketing. It feels to me always a little bit the same thing. And
Mm,
I feel like there's so many conversations that I have about different things with different people. And I wanted to have a podcast that actually, at least for these few episodes, I don't know how it will, grow over time, where I really could talk with different people about different things without worrying so much that we had to all drive to a certain point. Because
mhm.
I have a couple of things that are really at the core of what I do. One is that ultimately you have to find your path, and it's not going to be something where you're like, okay, I have my plan, A to Z, this is
Right,
it.
right.
Right? And so I'm kind of always curious about why people do what they do, how they did it, how life occurs to them. Like, I'm never gonna work in architecture, so I find it fascinating. And I feel like it doesn't even matter if you ever do, you might get ideas
Yeah,
listening, right?
totally.
The second thing is that I really think that within all of us, there's a deep place of inner wisdom. And so to learn how to listen to that, meaning to really realize that's what's there. It's a very big interest of mine. So for the podcast, I also invite people sometimes that we have more I don't know, talks about something that it's not so practical, quote unquote, but in my mind is very practical because if you lose your way inside out, it gets very hard in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, the one track of really focus on one thing doesn't work for me. Like I just mentioned, I'm trying to live five lives at the same time. And I also talked about earlier kind of having that side hustle leading to in opportunities that I could have never imagined, right? The podcast, those first videos that you saw that led to something else. And so that curiosity to just try to do those things led to opportunities, but it also led to just me becoming a more complete person, right? Communication wise, presentation wise. And what's interesting to me about that is like it's a feedback loop, right? And so if you're only focused on one thing, it's like in architecture, one of the common things is like architects don't take vacations. Like they just work hard all the time. They just work and work and work and work. And there's a lot of professors in architectural school who are saying, like dedicate your life to architecture. And and I feel like the opposite. Like only work the hours that you are contracted to work. Take time off. Use your PTO. Go on vacations because that feeds back into your professional life in a much more complete way than somebody who only does the one thing and focus, focus, focus on that one thing. And I feel like, we live in a world of like, it's capitalism, right? And competition. And at any cost. You killed the competition. It's just like the stakes seem so high. And I feel like that's led us to a place that isn't healthy. And so by being curious, by asking questions that aren't always on topic and finding out what actually drives individuals to be individuals and what's interesting to them makes us all more whole. It's a like on an architectural team, if I had a bunch of older white men on my team who all went to the same school and have all worked on the same project types, are we going to get a really great project? Or would we get potentially an even better project if we had as diverse of a team as we can with all different backgrounds and experience? Because we never know where good ideas are going to come from, right? And they don't happen when Aurora, give me a good idea right now. It doesn't work like that, right? Good ideas come when good ideas come and you don't know where they come from. It's the universe. It's that other thing I'm pursuing that I'm taking an idea from over there, like you just said, and applying it to this. Like you said, let's talk about architecture because maybe there's something there that applies to this. I love that kind of stuff, and I feel like it makes a much more rich conversation, right? So I'm with you on that, and I think that that's an important aspect that we've gotten away from in a world where everything is measured. There's metrics, there's analytics applied to everything. There's performance metrics. How many hours are you doing the thing? And I feel like a lot of this just comes from like the old paradigm of productivity, which was measuring, you know, how many cars are coming out the other end of the assembly line based on how many people are working and the parts that are showing up when it's really not about that anymore because we're so distracted all the time. And if you're sitting in your seat, you're quote unquote productive. I don't think that's not the case. In order to be productive, in order to have focus on the times when we can really make the biggest impact on quality and doing the thing that we can do the best, we have to have this other stuff that we can retreat to and have a whole life so that we can dedicate that portion of our life to doing that one thing really well. It shouldn't overtake everything.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I feel like curiosity is a really big thing. That if you can stay curious,
Hmm.
that is wonderful. Not only gives you good results, but it's just a wonderful way to go through life. But also for me, my experience is that the more I've let not so much my head, what's the reason for this? Why am I doing this? What's my plan for this? But more like maybe heart is like too cheesy, but like more like what feels good, you know, like not so much the intellect and more like a deeper wisdom guide me. I have
Hmm.
made amazing encounters, and some of the best people I met was through that. I don't know why. It just made sense to keep in touch with them,
Yeah.
for no reason.
Yep. Right.
It makes a very, again, it's like I feel better when I live from that place. And then somehow things turn better rather than me trying to control and want to extract in a way and so forth. So
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So I've been asking everybody actually I talk to, what do you think about this term inner wisdom? Like, do you feel there's something inside that guides you, or how do you relate to
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. I do. And I think the thing that I've noticed about me is asking why a lot more. Why do I feel the way that I feel is something that I've I've had a meditation practice for years, and a lot of that is about riding the wave of the thoughts that come through, but not letting the wave take you somewhere, right? It's really about kind of stepping back and allowing the emotions or the thoughts to go through, right? And just kind of floating there like a buoy, right? But something that I've really noticed recently, and I think this really came in these transitions from one job to another, you don't really notice it over time, but it builds up, which is frustrations with certain things, right? Oh, it's like you start to dread that next meeting or working with this individual or the responsibilities that you have in your role, or there could be a lot of things that are frustrated to you, and to kind of step back and notice when that happens instead of just reacting when it happens, right? Because you can't control what you can't control. You can only control how you respond to those things. I mean, that's a big reason for the practice of meditation, but actually stepping back and saying, okay, now why do I feel like that? It has been really eye-opening to me. And I'm not claiming any expertise here at all. Like this is probably like really low-level stuff that a lot of other people are way more in touch with about than I am. So I'm not trying to position myself as any expert here in any way. But to me, that just asking like, why do I feel like that? And starting to identify patterns has been a huge deal for me. And so I really do feel like you talked about the heart. Like there are more neurons in your heart than there are in your brain. Like it is like you might call it a second brain. It's another brain. There's a lot going on there. And humans like to attribute because we've got everything figured out, right? Like it's your brain. It's the thing. That's where the intellect is. That's where the intelligence is. That's where, your IQ. And it's like, that's not the whole story. That's just a piece of the puzzle. And all of the pieces of the puzzle actually matter. You can't be who you are without all of the pieces of the puzzle, and you're not just your brain, right? So thinking about consciousness and thinking about the different pieces of the puzzle, I really do believe and I feel like this is a very heart-based thing for me, like that wisdom of like, oh, now why do you feel like that? And then understanding yourself better through that process is a big deal because it tells me more about myself. It teaches me more about how I should interact with coworkers, with my children, with my spouse, like all of those things to make me a more complete person and a better person. So I really do feel like you have to listen to yourself, and a lot of times that's coming from down here, and a lot less so because it's a very busy place up here. Like this, to disconnect from the brain is extremely difficult for me, right? The thoughts are racing constantly. And that thing is trying to tell me what to do all the time, right? My brain is constantly trying to tell me what to do. Who does it think it is? Who's in control here? And I think trying to get more in touch with the wisdom of the heart, to me is I mean that's something worth pursuing, and that's something that I'm working on.
Hmm. Wow, that's beautiful. Um, all right, if anybody's interested in what you're doing, getting in touch with you, what would you say about your project and how they can, connect or find you?
Well, the best place probably to connect with me is on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, my name is Evan Troxel, and um, my websites are trxl.co, troxel.co. You could also go to evantroxel.com. That'll take you to the same place. And then archispeakpodcast.com. If you're interested in architecture, why architects do what they do, what's wrong with the profession, as well as what's right with the profession. We talk about all of it on there. So those are the best places. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, that's probably you'll get a little taste of all of that.
Yeah, and I'll post all the links on the podcast episode page.
Great.
Evan, it was so great having you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It was a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and for everybody who's listening, my name is Aurora Meneghello. You can find me at repurposeyourpurpose.com. Thank you.